All right, folks, welcome back to the Property Couch podcast. We have another big show today. Ben and I are getting into a big Q&A day. You know we love it. We love hearing from you. There's some wonderful questions. So we're going to cover off things like transferring property from a trust into your own name, also credit card surcharges and how that works with our Money Smart system. What else are we going to cover, Ben?
Mate, we've got people who want to know whether they can rent out their home whilst they go on holidays and what are the impacts for them. And then we also have paying off principal place of resident debt first versus paying off investment debt. So some awesome questions from our community this week.
Awesome questions. Which one of those should you do first? Folks, stick around. Let's rip into the show.
Welcome to the Property Couch, where each week you get to listen to two of Australia's leading experts. Bryce Holdaway, co-host of Location Australia on Foxtel's Lifestyle Channel, co-host of Escape from the City on the ABC, and partner of Empower Wealth Advisory. Ben Kingsley, chair of Property Investors Council of Australia and the founder of Empower Wealth Advisory, named the 2018 and 2019 Property Advisory Firm of the Year. Stay tuned as they bring you the insider's guide to property, finance and money management.
All right, mate, welcome back to the podcast. How are you up and about this week? Is your team any chance?
Oh, well, mate, could the script writers have written it any better?
Yeah.
In terms of, I mean, it's good for us, right? Our two teams going.
I've had people reach out to me saying, "Oh, I'm looking forward to the chat next week." I'm thinking, "Oh, Ben's probably looking forward to it more than me."
Well, mate, at the end of the day, you're in the arena. There's a chance to win, just as there is a chance for both teams. It's going to be a great contest. I cannot wait to get to the G. It was obviously a great game last week. It was, nice to be at. It was a good spectacle. Would have liked the result to go slightly the other way, but still.
How good September? September?
Make
Seriously.
no mistake, you've still got Sydney waiting at the SCG for you too, right? And they looked unbelievable against Melbourne. So they're the smoke.
No, all I'm worried about is this week, mate. But we like to be the hunter, not the hunted. So you guys are the overwhelming favourites. I mean, who else gets the overwhelming advantage that you get to have all of your finals played at your home ground all the time? So, I mean, even if you finish 8th, you'll get your home game. So
look, we've got to fund the clubs that don't have enough money to pay their players, Bryce. I mean, so if you want to get the big audiences, you got to put them in the big stadiums. It's as simple as that. You want to get the $4.5 billion TV.
Well, who's got the biggest memberships in the country?
I think Richmond, then
West Coast.
Yeah.
West Coast. It's over in Western Australia. Mate, so
I wasn't referring to having to pay Freo's wages. Yeah. I was referring to the other clubs who have been around who haven't tasted success.
So, folks, if you want to write in, it's Ben at, not Bryce at. Let him know.
May the best team win, but it's going to be exciting. It is going to be exciting.
It'll be exciting. You and I will be at the game.
We will.
So we'll see if we talk at the end of the game or not, or if I just avoid you. Interest rates, Ben, something happened this week.
Another 50 basis points increase. I've got plenty to talk about that. Obviously, cash rates at 2.35. I've done my economic update, but there's more to talk about, obviously, now that that's sort of settled in a couple of days after the announcement. So, I want to talk more to where properties are at and a couple of observations that I've got in what's making property news. So hang around for that.
Stick around to the end, folks. What's making property news? We'll unpack that a little further. And my little shout out, Ben, as we trickle into spring, Ben, it means that the next season is summer, and then we do our summer series. So at the beginning of the year, I shouted out to a bunch of people on this podcast and said, if you want to come on and be a part of our summer series, start working on getting your ducks in a row, house in order, getting all of your money management sorted. So I just want to do a little reminder to those folks. And if you are wanting to be a part of our summer series this year, reach out to Stig at thepropertycouch.com.au/my story, as we would love to hear from you. And I do this regularly, Ben. I want to talk to the person who just heard that and they had that little pang in their body going, oh, I reckon I got a story to share. And then they might have a little voice in the back of their head that goes, nah, I don't reckon mine will be interesting. I reckon, I'm a bit nervous about coming on. I just want to say, if that is you, absolutely, I want you to act on that little gut feeling that just happened and reach out to Stiggy. And Ben and I try and make it as comfortable and relaxed as possible, because we get that you and I do this every week, Ben, and we're relaxed about it. We get the people come on, they're a bit nervous, but I promise you, we'll host you really well. And it's all about sharing the stories that you have around money transformation, the properties you purchased, the pathway that you're on to have that lifestyle design. We get regular feedback that this is one of, if not the most popular parts of our podcast through the year, where people get to hear from other people, not just you and me, Ben, who are actually doing it, and some of the stories of adversity and what they've overcome and how they've done it. So, folks, it's coming. We will be recording that in summer, will be happening very soon. So if that's for you, just reach out to info@thepropertycouch.com.au. And that's something that people should do, shouldn't it, Ben?
Oh, look, I mean, we get so much out of it, right? It just empowers us to wanting to do what we want to do in terms of telling their stories. And again, coming back to your point, you mightn't sound like anything unique, but just the fact that you've organized your affairs and you've made progress, you've trapped that surplus and put your money to work is a story in itself, right? And then, overcoming barriers, money barriers, any sort of mindsets that you have around managing money, all of those matter. So yes, please, we would love to hear from you. We would love to have a chat on the Property Couch with you.
Success is simplicity in scale, Ben. It's not complexity. And so people often think that, my story is not interesting. Like the simplicity, the way you've kept it simple, the way you've overcome the public narrative, the way you've overcome mindsets. That's the stuff that people want to hear. So, folks, again, if you've got that little spark that said that this could be me, just talk to us. Let us have a conversation with you. If you put your hand up, it's not saying I'm definitely coming on, but it's putting your hand up to say, look, I'm pointing in that direction. I want to really be a part of it. So it's something that is a really, really huge feature of our podcast. I'm looking forward to that. And having said that, Ben, we've got a special guest next week. I won't go too early on who that is, but it's a new guest coming to the podcast, which is incredible, unbelievable insights. And just a little teaser, it's someone who's very in tune with the market and what's going on and giving us insights around interest rates and inflation, all those sorts of things. And then in a couple of weeks after that, we got another really exciting guest. We're going to talk about the long game, the 30-year plus game, which is really, really exciting. So lots to cover. Hey, we've got Q&A day today. We've got a bunch of speak pipes where people come on and be brave and ask their questions. We're going to hear your voice, hear your questions, answered on behalf of the community. But before we get there, Ben, Mindset Minute theme today, you and I are going to have a little conversation around this. But I stumbled across this around the Oracle of Omaha, which is, of course, W. Buffett. And he said there's 4 choices in life that separates the doers from the dreamers. And I love the simplicity of this. So wanted to share it with everyone because I think if you get these 4 things to land, it's pretty good. But number 1, he said, is one of the 4 choices. Number 1 is pick your friends wisely. So it's that old conversation of you are the average of the 5 people that you spend the most time with, Ben. I'm super stoked with my 5. I've got to be honest. And I'm very lucky that points me in the right direction. But I've even had to think about who my bench is on the 5, who I don't spend the most time with, Ben, but have influence in my life. And I'm super fortunate that the next 5 are incredible. So you're in that top 5, Ben. You're on the fence this week if your team wins, but clearly that's I'm the beneficiary of choosing my friends wisely there. So number 1. Number 2, go to bed a little smarter each day. Ben, you're a lifelong learner. This will probably resonate with you.
Yeah, it's every day I'm trying to improve in terms of understanding the knowledge that I have around, where the world's heading and what's going on in that particular space. So I just love learning. I'm a student of life. So yeah, this is a big area for me in terms of each day I try and sort of learn something new.
It's like that. It's like compound interest. I think if you just incrementally increase a little bit of your brain capacity each and every day, doesn't have to be massive, but just a little bit, and extend that over a long enough time horizon, that is a wonderful compounding experience. So number 2, go to bed a little smarter each day. Number 3, Ben, improve your communication skills. I rate in my top 5 books, How to Win Friends and Influence People. We spent some time on this podcast a little bit over a year ago where we summarized each chapter. I have been a student of this, trying to skill up on both written and verbal communication skills. But Warren, the Oracle, says that this is one of the 4 choices in life that'll separate you from the doers and the dreamers. So I think that's really important because we're going to interact with each other, Ben.
Oh, well, look, I mean, if you add it to number 2 about being smarter each day, I've got a fair bit of work to do on improving my communication skills. So this is always a work in progress.
It's a low base, mate. You've come from like out in the Victoria Park, it's not as if you have to have high level conversations out there. It's just, did he kick a goal? Oh yeah. Did he lose another grand final? Like, it's not as if you
don't make it personal. Don't make it personal. But yes, if you probably look at some of my tweets, I could probably read them before I tweet them. I reread them again before I tweet them.
There you go. There's a little tip. Go to Ben's Twitter and check out if he's got any grammar over there. So number 3 is improve your communication skills. And Ben, number 4, saying no.
Yeah.
Greatest commodity is time. So every yes needs to be guarded by 1,000 no's, Ben. So the difference between successful people and really successful people is that they say no to almost everything. So I think the ability to have the wisdom around, okay, what can I fit in my life versus what I can't. And I must admit, I've only been having a conversation with Andrew this week that everything seems to be flying, like the things that you think you can fit into a week and what you can actually fit into a week. But what do you think about that one? 4th choice is saying no.
For me, it's that sort of relates to focus. There's only so many things you can do and you can achieve and you can do really well. So that's right. If you focus on those things, then the distractions and the other things to the side are really going to slow you down on that, mission, purpose, whatever you're trying to do. So I really like that one. And it is sometimes really hard to say no. But when you do, it's only because you've obviously got higher priorities, and there's nothing wrong with having plans and goals and dreams and prioritizing those. So I think it's a ripper.
There you go, folks. Have a think about that as we go into the weekend, or depending on when you're listening to this. But 4 choices in life that separate the doers from the dreamers. 1, pick your friends wisely. Number 2, go to bed a little smarter each day. Number 3, improve your communication skills. And number 4, say no. So simple scales, complex fails. So make sure that you do the simple things, get that compounding benefit over the time horizon. Hey, Q&A day today. First question is from Tracy. It's a good one regarding transferring property from a trust to your own name. Let's have a little listen.
Hi, love your podcast and thanks for all your advice. Myself and my husband are in our mid-50s and retiring in about 10 years. We have 3 investment properties and no PPR. One of the investment properties has dual income. It's owned in a discretionary trust, but one's an older property and with a few significant repairs, it's heavily negatively geared. We're thinking of moving it to our personal names, given the quarantine of those losses, and we understand it's a costly transfer. However, with the pros and cons, retiring in less than 10 years and quarantining all those losses, we're starting to think that it may be more advantageous to do it now. Full stop. I know you've answered a few questions on trust. Just interested on if there is ever a good situation to transfer. Thanks.
Good question, Tracy. Thank you for that. Let's put the disclaimer up front. Ben and I are going to give you some general things to think about so that you can go and talk to your licensed professional accountant to get the actual facts for your particular circumstances. So we're just going to lube the wheels of progress and thought here so you've got some ideas to chat about, Ben. But this is a forever and a day. People are often wondering, do I need to put it into a trust because of the asset protection? Well, this shows one of the limitations of putting property within a trust, because what actually happens is the negative gearing benefits that you would otherwise get. So, 101, make a paper loss against the property and you can offset against other income in your own name. When it's in a loss and you don't have any other income attached to that trust, those losses become carried forward losses because you can't distribute the losses out to the individual to put against their other income. So the benefits of negative gearing can be lost if you don't have other business income or whatever is going into that property for the offsetting. So, but there's a whole bunch of ways that we can tackle this question. But first of all, I just want to reiterate, these are just ideas for you to sort of think about as you go to your accountant. Ben.
That's right. Unfortunately for Tracy, this question, there's still too many unknowns for us to get closer to that story. And those known unknowns are things like just how negatively geared is it? It's dual income producing. When we are talking about those significant repairs, what is the value of those significant repairs? So there would be a fair bit of modelling that you would have to do that, because as Bryce was saying, the transfer costs out of the trust, what losses are trapped in there? Is there going to be a gain, a capital gain? Now, those capital gains will offset those losses because it's the related assets. So that sort of makes, there's got to be some calculations done around that. So they're sort of some of the immediate questions that I would be having as an accountant who's trying to solve this puzzle. More broadly speaking, there is obviously that stamp duty transfer cost that's also going to be part of, those costs that you've got. So what are the gains that you're going to expect by having it in your name? So usually once you pick one vehicle, it's very uncommon that you would move out of that vehicle. I know she was saying, what are some of the examples where moving out of a trust environment may work? Well, there's not a lot of them that come to mind, and generally speaking, it's going to be case by case. I have seen examples where maybe a property is owned in a trust and then it's being bought by the principal residents and they're moving into it, or vice versa. It's owned by individuals and then they sell it into a trust because they want to keep the asset as they move to an upgrade or a downgrade. But the asset's a very good one, so they see future capital gains in that. So, but what you're doing is you're doing the numbers. You're doing what are those recycle costs? What are they going to come up to? And then, when is my break-even point? And then ultimately, how much time have I got as part of that break-even story? So this one, to me, just didn't sound like it's a logical thing to do. But again, I just don't have enough information to sort of form a more stronger opinion about Tracy's situation.
Tracy, you said it was 10 years as well. So you think about the pressure that the property that you would, if you sell it and you buy another one, the next property would be under enormous pressure just to get back to break even. So the time horizon for break even to obtain those perceived benefits, and I say perceived because they may just feel like perceived benefits, but Ben, you've said a couple of things, but how significant a cash flow challenge or is it hardship are trapping those losses in? Because clearly the cash flow that you get from the taxation benefits during accumulation phase right up to break even point is helpful for folks because they're getting rental income and they're getting cash flow benefits. You combine those two together, helps service it. You usually have a negative position right up until that break-even point. So how significant is that? And just remember, there is a part of the legislation of the Tax Act that says you can't do things just purely for tax reasons. So they will look under the veil and see what that entails. And equally, in a current Queensland land tax environment, you need to have a look at what other properties that you have, given some of the mooted changes that are going on there. So like everything that we talk about on this podcast, the numbers will set you free. Once you have line of sight, because the challenge is we've got these scenarios rattling around in our heads, thinking, should I, shouldn't I? It's occupying space in your head. And it's not until you actually, go to the accountant and say, scenario 1, leave it as is. Scenario 2, if I change it, and then just compare bottom lines. And then compare that to where the pain points are for you around, is it cash flow? Is trapping those losses putting you into hardship? But you got 3 investment properties, no PPR. Sounds like there's a deliberate strategy here for you to be more on the sophisticated side than the non-sophisticated side. So I'm, again, without, I'm making some assumptions here, but potentially not putting yourself into huge hardship. Is it just something that you have a preference versus not preferring to move it out? And if you've got dual income on the property, how quickly are you likely to move to break even? Because that's probably going to move you there a bit quicker. And then obviously once you have those losses aren't lost, they will be carried forward. So at some point in time when the property moves to break even, you would be able to offset the losses against the future gains, which will have future tax benefits for you as well. So that needs to come into it. And I guess lastly, if you do sell it, again, this is for you to check with your accountant, but you can only offset capital losses against capital gains. But if you've got ongoing income losses and then you have a future capital gain on the same asset, you would be able to consider whether you can net those off if you actually did sell the property. Because once you've done the numbers and realize one is better than the other, and maybe moving it out is better, well, then you have that available. But to Ben's point, I agree. It's very rare that you'd want to change the ownership structure so late in the game, given that 10-year horizon before you want to retire. So at face value, probably not, but subject to a bit more detail around that, Ben.
Yeah, I think for me, if there's a piece of advice that I can give you at that sort of 30,000-foot goal setting level here, Tracy, for you and your husband, is sit down and just try to document what retirement looks like for you. With no principal place of residence, that means you're potentially going to be renting, or you may have a plan to access super and pay a lump sum into a property. So there's a lot of unknowns here. But if you really do articulate what your retirement looks like for you and your husband, and you're really clear on the experiences that you want to have during that retirement period, and then you go and seek some professional advice and work back from that ideal design, lifestyle design, you're going to be in a far better position to then making sensible decisions around your 3 properties and your portfolio. I think that's a big story here, right? Because a couple that are retiring without a principal place of residence, which is non-means tested for pensions and all of those other things, you've got to work out just how much your property portfolio, and you may have some shares, and this is what we're saying, we just simply do not know. So you've got to work out what is the ideal lifestyle by design you want in retirement, and work back from that point there. And then with some professional advice, you should be able to get a better line of sight in terms of not only this trust property, but also your portfolio, your shares and super, how all of those work together to hopefully get you to that design that you're looking for.
Ben, I've been helping people buy investment property since 1998, so now I'm entering my 24th year, Ben, and I would say that anecdotally, in the high 90s, 95% of most of the purchases that people have done in that journey have been, including myself, largely have been in individual names. So there is a lot of discussion around asset protection versus exposure, all those sorts of things. And we've said this a couple of times on a couple of podcasts, but largely speaking, for anyone who is considering adding a layer of complexity, as we have here with Tracy, when you put it into a trust, there are a few additional considerations you need to think about. And if you are committed to that path, generally speaking, you want to stay committed for the entire journey. So thank you for that, Tracy. Great question. Next one is from Salah. I hope I've got that right. S-A-L-A, Salah Parwak. Great question, Ben, around credit card surcharges versus the Money Smart system. Let's have a little listen.
Hi, Bryce and Ben. Thank you for the show. I have listened to all 401 episodes and enjoyed every single one of them. My question is about paying a bill with a credit card with a surcharge versus keeping the money in the offset account for 55 days. Which options are better? Thank you.
Great question there, Salah. So just as a little bit of background, we obviously suggest that as part of the Money Smart system, that you maximize the amount of time that you keep your money in offset. And one of the strategies to do that is to use a credit card to pay for non-discretionary items like bills and payments, where you automatically go on the credit card. So you get up to 55 days interest-free, and that money sits on the offset account, accumulating a lower balance so that you're paying less interest over time. So Ben, this is a good question. And if there is a surcharge on the credit card or putting it into offset, which one is actually better?
Yeah, it is a good question. Thank you very much for it. Look, I did a little back of envelope calculation when I saw the question come through this morning, and I thought to myself, all right, well, let's just run an example. So we'll start with an example. So let's say I've got $1,000 bill that I have a choice of paying via credit card or via my direct debit via the offset account. Now, $1,000, they're saying that if you pay by credit card, there's a 2% surcharge. And so quick calculation there says that that's $20 for the privilege of paying for that via the credit card. So we keep that $20 as our cost of transaction via the credit card. Then we start to look at, okay, what if I kept that $1,000 in my offset account? And we're obviously interest rates are moving on a regular basis here. So I'm just doing a line of an example of 4.5%. And obviously the higher interest rates go, the better keeping money in your offset can potentially work. So at 4.5%, obviously you times that 4.5% by the $1,000, and you get $45. Now, that is, however, over an annualized period. So you then need to divide that by the 365 days. And that means that every day that $1,000 is sitting in the offset, and if I've got these calculations correct, it's 12.3 cents each day that you're saving in interest. Now, this is where it becomes an interesting question in terms of what Salah is talking about. I need to then times that by the number of days before that payment falls due. So in other words, if I paid it via the credit card, the up to 55 days interest free doesn't guarantee me that it's a full 55 days, depending on the cycle and when the repayment is due on that particular statement. But we'll assume that it is for illustration purposes, it is 55 days. So you times that 12.3 cents, you times that by 55 days, that's $6.78, right? So the maximum benefit you would gain in terms of, the transactional cost would be $6.78. So this is what you've got to say to yourself. If I use the credit card with the surcharge, I'm up for $20. If I keep that money in the account, all I'm saving is $6.78. So in theory, again, if my calcs are correct on this piece of paper, we're talking about a difference between those two of around $13, right? So $13.22. So in this particular case, because of the surcharge, you would have been better off paying for that via direct debit. Again, that's what we're sort of saying. Surcharges, you've got to work them out on a case-by-case basis. But in this particular case, it was clearly better that if you had to pay, so you wait till the due date of payment, don't pay it early. So you set it up as a bill payment that's going to be paid on the last day that it falls due, unless your bill provider, some utility providers, if you pay on time or slightly earlier, you can get 5% discounts or whatever that looks like. So that's all the calculations that you need to do. So in the example that I just used, direct debit was the better way to go. If there are no surcharges, then technically it's better to use the bank's interest-free money whilst your money is sitting in offset.
Great question, Salah. So the summary is where the surcharge is minimal or none, there is a case for it being on the credit card. Where the surcharge is in that example, as Ben said, there is a case for you being direct debit. But the point is this, here's the summary. Automation is the key, all right? Automation is the key. So you can set up the system so it's still allowed to do it 10 minutes a month. So if you do have a system where a particular bill, you could set it, you automate it from the primary offset account so that it's coming direct debit and you're saving the money. Or if it's in the credit card, it's automatic sweep doing that. So 100% case-by-case basis, 100% you need to do the numbers to see where the benefit lies. But automation, of the two, automation is the key. So make sure both of them automated so that you've got that. And Ben also made a throwaway line there, but as interest rate rises, there is a better return now, more and more over time, given that for every dollar that you do have in offset is actually returning you a net increased amount because it's money saved rather than money earned as well. So you're not paying tax on it as well. So good question,
the automated
Sarah.
piece there, Bryce, just to jump in there, what I love about the automation piece is what value do you put on your personal time, on your leisure time to actually manage your money? I've always said, work on, even if you're not earning this, try and work on $100 an hour, which comes back to, the sort of great statements that were made by Warren Buffett earlier, the 4 rules, in terms of if you value your time for every hour is worth $100 to you, you will say no to more things, right? And this is saying no to admin, which is actually really good. So I do like that reminder that automation is key here.
Well done, Salah. Good one. Next one's from Kyle Johansson with a question about renting their home whilst you're on holidays. Let's have a little listen to this one.
Hi, Bryce and Ben. Big fan of the podcast. Thank you very much for all the content you guys put out. Certainly found it very helpful along my journey. I just had a question in regards to listing your home on a holiday rental site. For context, I live in a coastal town in Victoria called Ocean Grove, and I'm considering putting my home up for rent while I'm away on holidays myself. I just wanted to know what things you guys think I should consider, and any tips you might have or anything along those lines. Thanks again, and go Cats.
Thanks again, and go Cats, Ben. That was just timely. That was
Very
just a little
timely.
salt on the wound for you. But here's a good question. Now, I do know Ocean Grove, Ben. In fact,
Yep.
it's just
It's one of your neighbours.
just the neighbour. So this could equally apply to where I live in Torquay or anywhere up the coast, which is in enormous demand at key peak periods throughout the year, right? So it's a great question. I think it's a great question because a lot of people, even if you're not in peak demand scenarios like that, but people often think, well, there is a shortage of accommodation. What should I do if I have some room, put some people in my home? In some cases, in Ocean Grove, people can actually put their stuff away, move, go away on holidays, Ben, come back, and the rent that they've collected from the house more than covered the holiday that they just went on, and they've got some change. If they can go through the inconvenience of packing everything up, the people in your personal space, the relationship you have with your neighbours, because all of a sudden someone's come and they've just partied up during summer, all those sorts of things. So at face value, it's looking pretty good, but it's not until you look under the detail, right, that there's a few more things to consider, Ben.
There are a lot of things to consider here, and one is obviously the impact to your principal place of residence concession and obviously any future capital gains, because at the moment you start to have an income producing asset where it's available for rent, that's going to impact in terms of that future story. So this is, again, why it should be case by case. In Kyle's case, he might be looking at sort of saying, well, I'm going away for 6 months or 12 months or whatever that might be. And ultimately, this property may eventually be a holiday home or a long-term rental property as he upgrades or downgrades. And so there's no intention of selling this particular property. So that conversation could also play out in a different aspect as well. So for me, there are a lot of nuances in the case law around this that gives you some idea. I always like to say, refer to a specialist and try and work out how often you're going to do this, and then what are those models. So coming back to, the answers in the numbers make the invisible visible. If this is a one-off event over a course of a 25-year period, it may be minuscule in regards to the amount of time that it has been available for rent. I know in the episode that I did with Talking Property Tax with Julia Hartman, when we discussed this topic, note keeping, diary notes, records, all of that is going to be critical as part of what disclosures you provide to the ATO. Remembering that it's obviously voluntary, those disclosures, but if you don't and you get caught, you are going to be in a lot of trouble financially and also, in terms of criminal activity. So from that point of view, it's always really, really important that that you think about the consequences, which Bryce laid out, which is like, wow, I just paid for my holiday because I just got someone staying in my place while I went on holidays, versus the unintended consequences are, oh, actually, what does it do? Oh, how does that impact my principal place of residence exemption? All of those things are at play here. And so for me, it's just about thinking about those things.
Yeah, the pros are obviously on the cash flow side. The cons are around you need to declare the income. There is going to be a capital gains tax consequence because you've got this wonderful exemption on your principal place of residence, which is capital gains tax free. But if you will be messing with that because you're changing the nature of it. So you hinted around the record keeping, but that can be onerous. And don't think it won't catch up with you because it's a no-brainer now for the ATO with all their sort of data matching. So so the answer to this question is really simple. You've got to just assess both sides of the equation, right? Because clearly the pros are enticing. It's whether or not the cons outweigh it or not. So when talking to our tax team, the summary was, maybe not worth it for a small period, and largely around affecting capital gains tax. They were the two sort of main takeaways. Now we've got a couple of blogs that we're going to put in the show notes for people to access that because you did a topic with Julia, Ben, around the 5 tax planning rules every property investor must understand. So this comes up a lot So you guys.
So it's a
covered this
bone
as well.
episode on the Property Couch. So you can also Google that on the TPC website. But we'll put it in the show notes, which will take you to the audio. And there's also a video version of
There's
that.
a video version as well. So good question, Kyle. I reckon a lot of people might be thinking about that. And as we lead into summer, the season that is well and truly for a lot of the coastal locations, people considering this. So good question. Hopefully that's helped. And as a son who follows the Cats, I agree. Go Cats. So next one is from Shannon Rosero. How did I go, Shannon? This question is, should we pay off the principal place of residence or our investment debt first? Let's have a little listen to this question now.
Hey guys, Shannon here, long time listener, first time recorder. Just want to say thanks to the both of you for all the work that you do. You guys were the reason that we made the plunge and purchased our second investment property at the start of COVID in Frankston in Melbourne. Very scary initially, but reaping the rewards now. My question is, once you've finished the accumulation phase and you have all the investment properties that you require, at consolidation phase, I know you guys and quite a few people say to pay down your principal place of residence first because of tax reasons, but I wanted to entertain paying down the investment properties first. I want to get your thoughts on that. Thanks.
Great question, Shannon. Let's just sort of give a little round of applause for the taking the plunge during COVID, Ben. Second investment property at the start of COVID would be doing very handsomely now, no doubt, because we know intimately is what's been going on in that particular market since that time. So well done for swimming upstream and everyone was swimming downstream, Shannon. Hey, Ben, there's a fundamental question here around which debt you would tackle first, and it really comes down to first principles. If you have debt that you pay, like we've got three types, if we go back to the three types of debt that are possible: horrible, tolerable, and productive debt. And the reason we group them in those three categories is horrible debt is stuff that you use to buy stuff that goes down in value. Tolerable debt is the stuff that you buy your roof over your head. The reason it's tolerable is because it provides a whole bunch of reasons outside of financial reasons, but you're the only one paying it off. So you got no help. Whereas the productive debt is usually where you get some assistance through tax or whatever cash flow that comes from that, which is why we say keep the productive debt last, because you're maximising your tax benefits and your principal place of residence paid off first, because that is you're slogging it out on your own. So there are a couple of little tweaks that can do that, but that's kind of the first principle here, Ben.
Yeah, it is. And I think it's also important to note that we don't say this is a pure tax reason why you would do this. A lot of people who, as Bryce mentioned earlier, most of us buy properties in our own names and we want to pay off our home loan first. The place that we live in, we want to pay that off first. And so that by doing that, that's not the reason why we do it, but we do get a tax benefit from ensuring that, you know, if that tax debt, that deductible debt is higher, we're obviously able to reduce our tax, which means that we can obviously continue to pay off our home loan quicker. So that's usually the main reason why people do this. Now, I understand where Shannon's going with this question, right? Because there is an argument depending on the arbitrage between the higher interest rate debt, which is usually associated with interest-only investment properties, versus, say, the lower interest rate associated with principal and interest owner-occupied debt. So is that arbitrage enough of a difference once you factor in that deductibility that's coming from paying your owner-occupied debt down first? So if that margin does get material, then the maths could show a slight benefit in terms of paying down some of that investment debt first. Now, over the 20 odd years that we've been doing this, that arbitrage hasn't been big enough to potentially justify that. But that's not saying that at some point in time you wouldn't switch your investment loan over to principal and interest at some point in terms of wanting to pay that debt down by getting a cheaper interest rate. All right, that is the important point here. So I always say as a general rule of thumb, you are better off to be paying your principal place of residence debt off first to get your home mortgage free, and then start to focus on paying off your deductible interest. But you would certainly focus in terms of building offset buckets. So the way in which our models work in our strategies, we have an offset bucket against your principal home. So you fill that bucket first. The next bucket that you do want to be filling is your highest cost of interest. So that's the bucket that we want to talk about. Now, we apply the same rules when it comes to debt consolidation and what you're trying to do there. You will always either consolidate debt where you can to reduce the overall cost of interest and then try and pay it off quicker. If you're not in that position to do that and you're carrying other forms of debt, whichever is the highest debt, you want to be focusing on paying off quicker as part of that, especially if that debt's also non-deductible and it's, as you say, it's horrible debt that Bryce was talking about before. So in summary, I really like where Shannon's critical thinking's going with this question, because I suspect he's got a few spreadsheets and he's working out the arbitrage, and I really love that about what you're thinking there, Shannon. And yeah, again, shout out for buying in Frankston when everyone else was scary and fearful. You saw opportunity, and you've obviously reaped the rewards of that as well. So that's my broader summary here, Bryce.
Yeah, and the other, to your point, Ben, the only other amplification there is if for some reason someone finds themselves in a zero or very low marginal tax rate, so that's where the benefits are derived from the investment properties, because you've got the ability to get some of the tax back that you're paying for the cash flow. Well, if that was at zero or very low, then that would potentially be another time when you have that arbitrage that you just talked about, where it might be cheaper to get the lending at PPR rates than investment rates. So that's something else to think about as well.
Yeah, unfortunately, we're lucky. We can put all these scenarios into our modeling software, and it delivers the financial arbitrage over a 20, 30, 40-year period. So there is a clear line of sight in terms of, when you actually have the actual numbers of each of the different interest rates and as they are. Now, of course, it is a forecast. It's it's not exact science, because we don't know where interest rates are going to go. And we don't know, just how aggressive the variation between investor loans and principal place of residence loans will be. So we're hoping that obviously over competition in the future, that interest rates will start getting back to where they were some 7 or so years ago, where you didn't have that arbitrage between investor loans and personal mortgages. So, and hopefully, any lenders out there who want to win some business from investors, if you make that difference very small, you may just see a flood of loan book growth coming your way, because that's exactly what we look at. I mean, now more than ever, with all costs going up over the next 6 to 12 months, we're going to be really focused on where our slippage is and where our wastage is. And so from that point of view, we're going to be really tight on that. And we did, last week's episode about, basically beating the banks at their own game was all about getting sharper pricing and making sure that that your mortgages are healthy and they've got competitive interest rates, because none of us want to have to pay extra interest. But ultimately, we do, as part of investing in property, debt is usually part of that conversation to get that overall return. And so, but at some point in time, we want to pay that debt off, or at least fill all of those buckets. Because as you know, Bryce and I are huge fans, as is all of the clients that we look after, about liquidity is a real advantage. So that's why we use offset buckets first and foremost, and then we can clear the debts out as we need to, as we start to land the plane in retirement.
Yeah, the only people that need to be fearful right now are those people who don't have any liquidity or any buffers. So be interested to see what the next disruption is, Ben, with that arbitrage, because it was Aussie John in the past, and now we're probably moving to a point where someone else is come and disrupt. And the other thing I'd say to you too, Shannon, is the feeling that you get when you pay off your home is there's this peace, right, that comes from that. And it's when you're doing the spreadsheets and you're doing the numbers, it's probably something that you can't factor in, that just the ultimate sense of satisfaction and feeling that you have from paying it off, which is why a lot of people want to do that. And then the question comes, once you have paid off the home, and then you go, well, where do I put my surplus? Well, you might say, okay, let's start putting the surplus in the buckets of the interest rates of the interest that I'm paying. Or you might sort of go, okay, well, that's surplus. What happens if I put that into the super environment, and then top up my super, and then what's the return that I get on the super? What's the benefit of that versus the benefit of just reducing the certainty and the that you get of knowing, putting money and offsetting against that, the certainty of the return, which is effectively equal to the interest rate. But you may be able to get it in a different environment, Ben, and so that's a wonderful decision that you will need to make at the time when you do retire out the debt.
Well, you would have seen a lot of, financial or finfluencers and all of these people sort of 12 to 24 months ago when rates were getting super low. They were talking about the arbitrage of the cost of borrowing money versus what they could get a return on that money, right? And, that was me, 20 plus years ago when I went and spoke to my financial planner and says, hey, I've got this itch that I want to scratch. I've got this line of credit, which is at 4% interest rate. And I've done some analysis on long-term, superannuation and share returns, and they're sort of sitting at 7.5%, 8%. There's an arbitrage there. Should I just load up all of that money into the share market and gear myself up? And
all those white knuckles.
Thank you, Martin McGrath, for that. He was my dad's financial planner, and so I wanted to get some professional advice before I did anything silly, rather than listening to other people saying there's a big arbitrage here, there's a massive opportunity, get into the market, which is what we saw. And now, obviously, the equity markets are showing us that they're not always favourable. So he just said don't, and I went, but why not? And he
it's a
said,
no-brainer.
because I've been around for a couple of decades, mate. It's not my first rodeo. And I said, okay, all right. And I didn't. I took his advice. And that's sort of what we're saying here. But there is definitely, as one of the things you will learn as you build wealth to a certain level, some of percentage of your wealth can be at a higher risk, right? So you're not risking the farm, but you might sort of say 5 to 10% of your net worth could be in a more aggressive platform. So this is where, again, I understand why we have rules around risk profiling and but we have this sort of catch-all idea that, this is your risk profile and you won't do anything about that. I have a view, along with, some similar views to Warren Buffett around diversification. I don't necessarily think I need to be that diversified if I sort of know what I'm doing. If I don't know what I'm doing, I absolutely need to be diversified. But I'm also, so I've as that wealth has grown, 5 to 10% of that money is effectively in very high risk areas. And I'm looking, I'm backing myself on. But if something was to go wrong and I lost all of that money tomorrow, I'm okay.
Yeah, because the important point you said is you're not risking the farm. That's right. The essential thing here. So,
a great question, and I really like where your mind is at, Shannon. So that's you really trying to fine tune how to get the benefit out of that, and that's why I think it's a great question. So,
which is what we're encouraging everyone in this season to be fine tuning and looking for all those little nuances to help with their cash flow. But thank you, Tracy, for your question. Also, you, Sala, Kyle. And that final question there from Shannon, hopefully that's helped you and also helped our community with some of the answers. Now, my life hack today, Ben, I've got a guest appearance for my life hack. So it's you. You've got this little life hack for me. So send it through to me during the week. And I think I'll need a little backstory first, and then let us know what the life hack is.
Anyone here that works for Facebook? So I'm locked out of Facebook, Bryce. I've been locked out of Facebook now for the last 3. I haven't been banned. I'm not one of these people that writes all this crazy stuff on there. The reason why I'm locked out is because of 2-factor authentication, Bryce.
Yes.
So I was smart enough from a security point of view to make sure that I had 2nd-factor authentication through my phone, obviously through how I log in on my desktop. Now,
foolproof. Nothing could go wrong.
For whatever reason, every time I log into Facebook, on the desktop, it doesn't recognize me through my Chrome platform. I don't know what it is anyway. But here's what happened. I've recently had a phone upgrade. After about 4 years, I've decided to go to a new phone.
Wow.
So I set up the new phone, and obviously it's an Apple phone. So you've got an iPhone. So it transfers all of the information across, right? It's pretty
beautiful.
Pretty spectacular in terms of how you put them next to each other and off it goes, right? Yeah. So I'm assuming that everything's being transferred. I'm assuming that all the apps and everything are being transferred.
Is everything all right? Anything go wrong?
A lot went wrong. But the biggest one that went wrong was the Google Authenticator doesn't carry over all your original authentications. So smart boy, I thought, okay, I need to clear that phone for security reasons. So I cleared my old phone, reset it back to factory settings.
Nice work. Oops.
Then go to try and get into Facebook. You need to go to your mobile phone to get your authenticator. It's not there. Oh, that's right. It'll take me through this sort of myriad way to, if you can't do that, just go back to your desktop, go back to the desktop version through my browser. It can't recognize me. So it says, go back to your phone. Oh, okay. But now we just need your two-factor authentication code. Oh, you don't have one. It's just been basically a circular reference. So anyone from Facebook, reach out to me. I can't get on. And I've got important messages to talk about with the new More platform to all of the people in the Make Money Simple Against community that's on Facebook. And I can't talk to them, Bryce, because I'm locked out of Facebook because I made a mistake. So my tip is, do not reset your old phone until you have transferred all of your two-factor authentication apps across, because you will be locked out. And it's very difficult, especially with businesses like Facebook. There is no customer service center that you can ring, so it's a bit of a mess.
You don't have a direct line to Mark?
Oh, yeah. Well, he's in the Caribbean at the moment. I don't know what he's doing down there, but no, I don't have.
If it makes you feel any better, Ben, I have been locked out on the browser myself. They say, go and do this, and you can authenticate on your mobile app. You run down that rabbit warren, and that, we've got a lot of grey hair. Just trying to do that doubles it, right? And then even then you follow it, and it's not in the spot that they say. So I'm with you, mate. If there's anyone from Facebook,
it's very frustrating for us. But look, at the end of the day, we're novices. We're not tech gurus.
No.
But yes, it's certainly been very frustrating.
It'd be okay for simple people like us, Ben. So there you go. That's your life hack. So thanks for your guest appearance on that, mate. So you sent that through to me. I thought that might be worth sharing with the community. So nice. But what's making property news, Ben, is clearly around interest rates and the commentary around that. But what do you got for us?
Well, there's plenty to talk about in this space, but I did pick up on an article around where the housing market is still not showing any signs of distress. So whilst, yes, it's pretty easy for a media company to reach out on the likes of Facebook and all of those areas to potentially get some person who will appear on a program to talk about how, they're struggling with their mortgage. And there's still plenty of media stories around that. When you actually go to the research houses that specialize in property research, it's really clear to us that there's no indication that we're at any levels. We're only at half the levels of what we were pre-pandemic in terms of properties showing signs of distress. So we mentioned this a while ago, Bryce. I probably think it's in our sort of February timeframe when we started hearing, the opportunity around, or the changes around interest rates, and there was going to be all of this, the property market's going to be in free fall because everyone won't be able to do that. We said 2 or 3 years ago, and I think this is a really important message, that we said if interest rates were to go up, there was really only going to be one reason for that, and that was that unemployment would be basically at full employment, which is where it is at. Now, the thing that we didn't factor in was a war. So we didn't factor in the black swan event of Russia invading Ukraine, and that has obviously led to a global supply chain and obviously pricing shock that's also manufactured this global inflation story. So we were right in the sense that if interest rates were going to come back up to the levels that we saw 7 to 10 years ago, it would be on the back of record low unemployment, and why we're not seeing this mortgage stress or signs of distress is because loss aversion. It's a very common economic behavioral science technique that people dig in and they find a way. And we mentioned before, in terms of ratios of jobs available versus people in Australia looking for work, there are more job listings in this country than there are people available to do them. So it just goes to show you that, and that's the interesting part about how this does play out, and why it's unique in terms of just how far the RBA has to take the cash rate. But I'm really confident in the current settings that we're not going to see really high levels of mortgage stress. If this was to play out over the next 5 or so years, and a really stagnant economy, because we crashed the plane as we were trying to land it, all bets off. But the way in which we see it moving, the way in which see most economists see it moving is we're going to overshoot the neutral zone, which will be probably next month and the month after. Then as we start to see the brakes go on the economy, first indicator is going to be retail sales. Then the consumer, that's the one we want to stop at the moment because they're quite resilient. Then we're going to sort of probably start to see interest rates coming back down at the end of next year, because getting them back to that neutral zone once we know inflation is in check.
Mate, vendors are humans too, right? So they're going, well, to your loss aversion point, they're not going, oh, I'd really love to put my property on the market now when sentiment's low. So there's no opportunistic listings going on there. So it just goes back to the typical motivations of the 5 Ds of why people are listing. But it kind of still talks to, like, so I was looking at a property in Geelong, Ben, just keeping an eye on it, and it went well over what I thought it was going to go for just on the weekend, right? So, but it was an A property. And so again, people on this podcast who've been listening for some time understand that global headlines don't help anyone, but there's still the talk around properties going to drop by this, and in Melbourne it'll drop by this, and Sydney will drop by this, and kind of just remind people. I'll talk to it in our life hack next week, Ben. I've got an idea that I'll share around this, but it's still important to understand that vendors aren't listing in droves, as you talked about, and we've talked about ad nauseum. There's still surplus in the system. People are just frustrated. There are a bunch of people who are genuinely hot to the eyeballs that will be in some strife. But generally speaking, the LVRs across the category is pretty good. So I think that's important message that you're sharing there. That interest rates aren't going up when the economy is tanking. Interest rates are going up because there's a mechanism to try and take a little bit of heat out.
Yeah, that's right, mate. And look, two other important little stories on the property front. One relevant to the big clash on the weekend. Scott Pendlebury.
Oh, sorry, you can't even pronounce your captain's name.
No, Scotty Penders. That's probably how I know him. Yeah. He and his wife Alex sold their property in Elwood for a lazy $6.5 million in a quiet sale, sort of off-market type arrangement. So they've done all right out of that particular property. Interesting to see where he goes next. But more importantly, obviously, is we've started to see a lot more traction around the story around land tax. Queensland's new renters tax, the great renters tax of Queensland, that is starting to get some real, momentum in terms of, because people didn't realise it was done in stealth. It was sort of hidden behind everything. Now people are starting to go, what? How? And because it's also commercial property as well as residential property, it's like, what do you mean? What? Sorry. So I would expect that we're going to see more and more stories coming out for that. And even the finance minister in New South Wales, Bryce, is being quoted in the Fin Review earlier this week, talking about that it might even be unconstitutional.
Unconstitutional.
Well, it's certainly not in the spirit of the Constitution around, states taxes and raising money or using a calculation that raises money for Queensland infrastructure from other Australians outside of that. And as we say, it's going to increase rents for most people who are impacted by that as well. So definitely a developing story, and certainly something that will continue to put pressure on the Queensland government to review and hopefully repeal in the not too distant future.
And you and I are working on trying to land an interview with someone who we think will have something to say about that, Ben. So early days, it's looking very positive. So we'll announce it. But we've got some incredible guests coming up here on the Property Couch. So stick around. But another big show, Ben.
Yep.
Off some more questions.
Love talking property with you, Bryce, and money and finance and all things.
Best time of our week, isn't it? But folks, that is the quickest way to get your question answered. Go to thepropertycouch.com.au, leave a speak pipe and try and make the question not too specific to your individual circumstances so that it can benefit everyone. And we've got a few more of these planned coming up. So leave the details, mate. But big show, lots to cover. Hopefully that's helped the community, mate. But until next week,
Knowledge is empowering, Bryce, but only if you act on it.
Act on it, folks. See you next week.
Hey guys, Bryce here again. Just want to catch you before you go and let you know, if you're new to our community, there are a lot of episodes to catch up on, but it's really important that you start from the very beginning at episode number 1. Because episode 1 through to 20 share all of the foundational pillars and frameworks that you need to know to get the best out of listening to this podcast. So I'd recommend that you start there, and the little tip is to maybe start on 1.5 speed. Now, for those of you that are time poor and don't have time to go back from the beginning, don't worry, we've got you covered as well, because we've created a binge guide that goes through all of the details and makes it easy for you to read and get up to speed very, very quickly. So if you go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, you will be able to download that binge guide and you will be up to speed in no time. And whilst you're there, I've got a few extra goodies for you, because we have our top 5 frameworks that you'll learn on this podcast, as well as the Make Money Simple Again ebook, which will help you with the foundations of basic money management, so you'll have everything you need to succeed in building your own lifestyle design and getting the best out of this podcast. Now, just a reminder that anything that we cover on this podcast is not considered financial advice. We certainly recommend that you get your unique circumstances looked at by your individual advisor, and everything we talk about is just general in nature. But folks, I want to encourage you again to go to thepropertycouch.com.au/fast track, and you can go and get all those goodies and catch up right away.